and I'm finally back to doing Mario videos. The last time I talked about Mario on this channel was back in August when I did Super Mario Sunshine, and I just wanted to do other things since then. Now that I've done that stuff, the Mainline Mario Marathon, as I now choose to call it, is finally back in here to stay. Until I end up wanting to do something else again, I guess. Anyways, if you remember all the way back to my Super Mario Sunshine review, which feels like ages ago by now, you would think I've staked my claim in the Super Mario series by this point. Sunshine is my favorite entry in the series because it was a perfect marriage of its own new and creative ideas with everything that made the series so great up to that point. However, the game was still a relative commercial flop. Not because of the game itself, but the fact that the Gamecube was unfortunately a commercial failure itself. The PlayStation 2 completely destroyed it and sold over 100 million more units, and the only reason it didn't come in last place was because of the premature discontinuation of the Sega Dreamcast. Hell, even the then new Microsoft Xbox managed to outsell the Gamecube. Looking back, this very well could have been the end of the line for the Mario series. Thankfully, however, this grim fate would not befall the series. While Nintendo's home console endeavors were relatively unsuccessful during this era, their handheld business was a different story. Nintendo's handhelds have always been immensely successful, sometimes even more so than their home consoles, and they've essentially had a monopoly on the handheld gaming since the release of the Game Boy in 1989. This success in the handheld market carried over into the new millennium with the first full successor to the Game Boy Advance. The GBA is part of what kept Nintendo alive during this era, and of course, the system would receive its own group of Mario games, the subject of this review, the Super Mario Advance series. What a creative name. Sounds like something I would have come up with. Anyways, these games were some of the only Mario platformers on the system. They were essentially ports of the Super Mario All-Stars versions of the games, albeit with a few minor changes here and there. That's the thing about handheld Mario during this era. Instead of how things were on the Game Boy with the Super Mario Land titles, which were original and exclusively made for that system, the GBA would not receive its own original Mario games. Well, at least in the realm of the platformers. It would take until the DS for handhelds to receive an original Mario game, and even then, that platform also started off with its own remake of a previous entry. The Advance series was essentially GBA ports of the SNES versions of these games. Like I said already, goddamn, I fucking write a script that isn't repetitive as fuck. The Game Boy Advance was pretty much a portable Super Nintendo, and those versions had much better visuals anyways, so this makes a lot of sense. Oddly enough, only Mario 2, 3, and World would receive this treatment. Yeah, no Super Mario Bros. 1. There was an Advance 5 planned, which would have been at that game, but it never came out. And instead, Super Mario Advance 5 would serve as the starting point for something else, but I'll get to that chestnut later in this marathon. Yes, I am aware of Super Mario Advance 3 Yoshi's Island as well, but like I said at the start of this marathon, no Yoshi's Island, so we're not covering it in this video. That may seem pretty awkward, but you can blame Nintendo's odd decision making for that one. Also, no Super Mario Deluxe or Classic NES series because I have pretty much nothing to say about them. Deluxe is a mediocre port of Mario 1 with terrible screen crunch, and the Classic NES series version is a decent GBA port of the same game. Nothing more, nothing less. Anyways, without further ado, let's get this son of a bitch started. Let's start with, of course, the first game in the sub-series, Super Mario Advance. Oddly enough, this game is not a remake of the original Super Mario Bros. Like I said. It's a re-release of... Oh dear god, no. Yeah, instead of doing the logical thing and releasing Super Mario Bros. In the advanced style, they go ahead and dredge up this old piece of history that should have been left behind. In case you've forgotten, I don't even like Super Mario Bros. 2, and I consider it one of my least favorite games in the series. That on its own already makes me worried about this game, but you know what they say, you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. I'm willing to give it a chance. After all, it has been 2 years since my last playthrough, and I recall having an okay time with it. Not without problems, but I remember it being an alright game. So let's dive in and see if Super Mario Advance still holds up for me. Immediately as you boot up the game, it's overflowing with promise and even some next-gen appeal for a handheld title. The game now has an opening cutscene, in which a vignette the size of the original Game Boy screen fades away to reveal the larger size of the GBA screen. Sure, it's not much by today's standards, but for 2001, this was a huge increase in screen space on a handheld, which is a perfect segue into the visuals. Naturally, since this is a GBA game, the colors are brighter and more washed out than the SNES version, but I still think it looks good for the platform, especially on the original GBA screen. I recorded this, as well as the other advanced titles, through the GameCube's Game Boy player, since it's the only method I have for recording these games off of original hardware. Let me tell you, this does not do these visuals justice. The only real way to see this is to play the game on the original screen for yourself, so you'll just have to take my word for it. Either way, it's still far better looking than the NES version, so there's that. Fairly colorful, the sprite work is pretty good, the background and general environments are appealing to the eyes. All in all, it's a decent looking release. As for the music of this port, it's easily my favorite rendition of the soundtrack. I've always liked the music of Super Mario Bros. 2 and found that it's one of the game's unequivocal positives. However, the SNES version managed to fuck it up, as its instrument choices were not ideal to say the least. Advance, on the other hand, features the best instrumentation if you ask me, which is impressive if you consider the GBA's extremely limited sound capabilities. The samples, despite their lower fidelity, just sound more fitting for these songs and are more energetic. more full of life. That's the best adjective I can think of to describe it anyway. So why not have a sampling of my favorite tracks in the game? Now for the gameplay, which should be pretty easy to understand. Super Mario Bros. 2 was a side-scrolling platformer, so naturally, so is Super Mario Advance. I think every last one of you knows what that is, so I won't bore you with the details since I know you're likely a very busy person. So how was the gameplay itself? Well, it's definitely better than the console versions, but not by much. I haven't touched this game in over 2 years, and after revisiting it for this review, I think I understand why. Before I get into that, let's discuss positives. I still like the addition of multiple playable characters that you can swap between, since it gives the game more depth than it would have had otherwise. You have Mario, the most balanced character, Peach, the best character for platforming because of her hover ability, Toad, the best character for bosses because of his fast object pickup speed, and Luigi just sucks. Overly floaty jumps, extremely slippery controls, just a nightmare to control in general. But regardless, this system is quite well implemented, and they even allow you to switch after every death instead of after reaching a new stage or after a game over. The health system is also massively improved over the console versions. Health was an extreme rarity there, but here all you need to do is kill 2 enemies with the same object, throw or kill a big enemy, or just find it somewhere in the stage. This makes this version a lot more accessible than the original, and I couldn't imagine the game without this. I also think there's a handful of decent moments, especially early on. To be honest, the first 2 worlds have alright design and some fun bosses. Now, Birdo was just a shitty boss in general, but fights like the Snake Demon and Mecha Birdo, the latter of which is even exclusive to this version, I like them. I could do without the awful voice-acted WWE intros,
I'm too hot to touch!
but what can you do? And that's really it. That's all the positives I can speak of. Remember how literally a minute ago I said I remembered why I don't come back to this game often? Well, I wasn't kidding when I said that. A few years ago, I would have said I liked this game. Hell, I even said that in my December collection tour last year, but that was before I actually sat down to play the game for this video. While recording it, I realized something. This game sucks. It sucks really bad. Now, it's not one of the worst games I've ever played, and I could name numerous titles that make this one look like a damn masterpiece. However, playing this game is just... For starters, the controls are... bad. The controls of Super Mario Bros. 2 were never good, even as far back as the NES version, but I swear, this one is even worse. The acceleration alternates between too slow and too fast, and the jumps are extremely stiff. However, the worst part boils down to one word. Slipperiness. I can't mince words when I say that these are some of the most slippery controls I've ever used in a side-scroller. I can't even begin to count how many fucking times I fell off of the edge of a platform just trying to get my bearings or trying to land on it, because the controls are just that slippery and awful to use. It's like the characters put extra butter on their shoes this morning and dreamt that all of Subcon's land turned to ice or some shit. As for the level design, I think I said I liked it in my Super Mario Bros. 2 review, but after playing this game, holy mother, I was wrong. The level design in this game is just awful. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like I said, the first 2 worlds are overall decent in this regard, but by the time you reach World 3, the level design declines significantly. So many of these levels are just big mazes with no sense of direction, or they just dogpile you with an absurd amount of enemies and tell you to deal with it. Not to mention, these levels go on for what feels like an eternity, which is not a good combo with horseshit design. The biggest problem with this game's level design, though, is the enemy placement. Put bluntly, it's absolute horseshit. I already complained about this in my original review because this is an inherent issue with SMP2's design. Thus, by proxy, this game also suffers from it. I especially hate the bombs and the amps. The amps cause this irritating screen effect when you get hit by them, which is just disorienting, while the bombs are often dropped onto you and they're nearly impossible to kill without hurting yourself. They also place these things in the ground every now and then, which always causes an unfair hit, and it just makes me groan every time. These enemies always get in the way and are always in the most inopportune spots humanly possible. It's like the designers haphazardly scattered them everywhere in the original release, and then the devs of this remake said, yep, this 100% holds up, couldn't could possibly improve on this. Now where's my paycheck? I could also go on and on about the bosses in the same fashion, but I don't see the need to. When they're not pathetically easy, they're incredibly frustrating because of this game's abysmal controls and physics, which make it nigh impossible to avoid damage. However, the absolute worst thing about this game is the camera. Now I understand that the GBA has a much smaller screen size than the other systems. The NES and SNES frames are 256 by 240 and 256 by 224 respectively, whereas the GBA is only 240 by 160. Thus, it's expected that the games would have a much more limited screen space. With a remake of the game designed for a smaller screen, you'd hope the devs would make the sprites smaller, or tweak the enemy and hazard placement, or pan the camera more, or do literally anything to make the game more playable on a smaller screen. But for Super Mario Advance, they didn't do that. This game has by far one of the worst cameras I've ever seen in a 2D platformer. The camera in this game is terrible, even for GBA standards. For one, the damn thing refuses to pan when you need it to. More times than I can count, I had to take a leap of faith because the camera wouldn't pan down. It's also complete garbage with horizontal panning. Whenever you turn around and face left, it automatically obscures whatever is to the left of your character, and when you try to move it back, it doesn't fucking budge. You have to walk pretty far to the right to reposition it properly, which risks an ambush from an enemy you couldn't see. Which, speaking of enemies you can't see ambushing you, do you want to know what the worst thing about this game's camera is? Vertical sections. To start, it doesn't pan smoothly. It suffers from what a wise man once called air suspension shit lift. This was done on the NES version because the system couldn't handle smooth vertical scrolling without an enhancement chip, apparently, but bafflingly, the GBA version doesn't fix this. That means whenever you touch the upper or lower regions of the screen, you're locked into this panning animation. It's a massive pace breaker and can even fuck you up if you slipped off a platform because of the terrible controls, leading to complete disorientation as you desperately try to land on a platform and inevitably end up falling a distance that would make the Burj Khalifa blush. That said, the absolute worst, most terrible, most awful thing about this game can be summarized in 2 words: falling enemies. I'm serious, this is by far the worst case of vertical screen crunch I have ever seen, at least in a Mario game. Across numerous levels, you'll be ambushed by enemies from above, spikes or pits from below, and everything in between. If you need an example, how about the worst stage in the whole game, 5-3? World 5 as a whole is incredibly shitty and filled to the brim with bullshit design, but 5-3 is the poster child for everything I hate about this game. Annoying enemies? Check. Frustrating platforming? Check. Terrible boss fights? Yep. However, the worst thing about this stage is this goddamn motherfucking vertical tower climb. This section seems to think that spamming amps, shy guys, bombs, and these fire flower enemies is the greatest idea for a level ever, and then it decides to place them in a way that they drop onto you from above before you can react. This level nearly drove me insane. I was stuck on here for, no joke, over an hour. So why not have a death montage, so you too can experience the pure frustration along with me. Needless to say, this level made me realize just how much this game truly sucked. It was every last one of its issues collapsing in on themselves, and it just took it all out of me. After this point, the game does get a little better, but not by much. The rest is still chock full of annoying enemies, frustrating puzzles, and not a single ounce of fun to be had. By the time I reached 7-2, the last level in the game, I'd just gone through the bullshit of 7-1, and I had 1 life left on the mid-stage Birdo boss with Toad. After dying, I'd have to do the stage again from the beginning, and at that point, I decided I didn't care anymore. So I quit. Yeah, I stopped playing the game. I could have pushed through and finish it, but I don't really see the point. I wasn't enjoying myself, and I just didn't have the energy to subject myself to that awful stage again. This game fucking sucks. It's way worse than I remember it being, and is easily one of the worst Mario games I've ever played. It's not as bad as Lost Levels, the original versions of SMB2, or a certain other entry I'll touch on in a future video, and like I said, I've played far worse games, but I just did not enjoy Super Mario Advance at all. It had a handful of decent moments, massively improved health system, and decent music and visuals, but when the gameplay itself was revolting, then these things don't really matter all that much. I haven't played this game in 2 years, and after this playthrough, I will never ever play this game again without a damn good reason for doing so. Phew. Now that that's over with, let's move on to Super Mario Advance 2, Super Mario World. It may seem like this entire sub-series of GBA remakes is doomed from the start because of the first entries lacking quality, but thankfully it's all uphill from here. Super Mario Advance 2 is actually pretty solid, which should be an unsurprising observation coming from me. If you remember back to my review, Super Mario World is my favorite 2D Mario game. Naturally, since this is a remake of that game, you'd think I'd get a kick out of it. Now, this had every chance to absolutely blow up in Nintendo's face, but thankfully they stuck the landing with this one. But it's still not without its downgrades or issues. Let's get into exactly why that is. The story is much better presented in this version. Instead of how the original did it, where you're just plopped into the game and given a brief expositional blurb from a text box, Super Mario Advance 2 features an intro cutscene that establishes the game's central narrative conflict. Of course, it's a Mario game, so it's nothing particularly complex. Mario and Luigi take a vacation to Dinosaur Island with Peach, Bowser swoops in and takes her while the brothers are distracted, and now they have to rescue her, along with their new friend Yoshi. It's the same exact story, just given much better framing, even though you still get the same text box. But hey, this part has Luigi running around like a madman, which cracks me up. Anyways, the graphics. My commentary for this game is pretty much the same as Advance 1 on this subject. I think the game looks good for GBA, but it pales in comparison to the original. Again, I had to record this game using composite video in the Game Boy player, so my footage doesn't do it justice by any means. But even on the original screen, I can tell that the colors are brighter and more washed out than the original. As for the music, I'm more mixed on this one. Obviously, the sound hardware of the GBA is very limited in comparison to the SNES, so by that standard, the soundtrack of Super Mario Advance 2 is fine. However, if you want my honest-to-God opinion, something I assume you came to this video for in the first place, this remixed soundtrack is a noticeable downgrade from the original rendition. In general, the instrument choices they made give the game a weaker sound. The original sound font provided some decent atmosphere and depth of sound for a 1991 release, whereas the GBA version loses that in the transition. For example, the ghost house and cave themes were surprisingly atmospheric in the original, while they sound more flat here, though I still have my favorites that are pretty good. I have heard of some people who prefer this rendition of the SNES soundtrack, and that's okay. Music is highly subjective after all, so if you prefer how the GBA music sounds, there is absolutely no problem with that. I just so happen to like the SNES music more. The game itself is fully intact from the original. It's a remake, so naturally you would hope it plays just as well as the original did, but you'd be surprised at just how easy it is to fuck that up, even on the GBA alone. Thankfully, Nintendo didn't drop the ball on this one, and Super Mario World survived the transition to a handheld. The control and level design are, as expected, pretty much identical to the original version. The secret exits and progression system are also identical, so everything I praised about it in the original review carries over here. It's the same handling, levels, and gameplay you all know from Super Mario World. It was fun on Super Nintendo, and it's just as fun here. That said, I found moving diagonally on these climbable fences, as well as jumping out of water, to be rather finicky and unresponsive, but that could just be my controller or the Game Boy player, or even both. Certain stages also seem more obnoxious, such as Wendy's Castle and the Valley Ghost House, and I really don't know why. Maybe the control is ever so slightly different, and it only became noticeable and threw me off in these stages, but other than that, I couldn't possibly explain it. This version is a blast to play a majority of the time despite that. However, the game still has a mild case of screen crunch. Now let me get this straight. It's nowhere near as constant and pervasive an issue as it was in Super Mario Advance 1, but I still counted a few moments where the visibility, especially vertically, was less than ideal. It's a relatively rare occurrence in this game, and even with these few annoying moments, I found that this port worked far better for the GBA screen size. Nintendo must have heard complaints about the garbage camera in Super Mario Advance and did everything they could to fix it in the sequel. Now if only they did things like that these days. But, sorry, I'm jumping the gun way too early. What was I talking about again? Oh yeah, Super Mario Advance 2. This version of the game also has a few additions and improvements of its own. For one, the save feature has been changed. In the original, you can only save after beating certain levels, like ghost houses and fortresses. In the GBA version, you're given the ability to save whenever you want, even while you're in a level. This was a common sense change since this was a handheld game after all, and I approve of the addition. It's not a game changer and I'm used to the original save feature, but it's still nice to have it. The most substantial improvement in this version makes is undeniably the hit point system. In my original review, this was one of my main criticisms of the SNES version. Instead of carrying over the system from Super Mario Bros. 3, where you wouldn't shrink if you got hit with a fire flower or some other second level power up, Super Mario World brought back the system from Super Mario Bros. 1, where you would shrink no matter what power up you had. The item reserved at the top of the screen helped mitigate the frustration that would be brought on by this, but I still would have preferred the SMB3 hit system, to be honest. As I've implied, this is not the case in Super Mario Advance 2. If you get hit with a cape or fire flower, you'll still have the mushroom and will be able to take an extra hit. This game also still has the item reserve, so it proves that the system still could have worked in the original with the SMB3 hit points. Again, I can still play the original just fine, but I approve of this change because it makes the game more accessible for newcomers. What else? Oh yeah, Luigi is playable now. And he's awful. I mean, he jumps way too high, descends from his jump way too slowly, making precision near impossible, and feels like he's on ice. Just stick to Mario if you're gonna play this game on GBA. Overall, this may just be the best version of the game, but I nonetheless prefer the SNES original. The GBA version presents the story better and even fixes a few of my problems with the original, namely the HP system and the inability to save anywhere. However, those problems weren't particularly intrusive on SNES. They're flaws that detract in a critical sense, but not in a personal enjoyment one, if that makes any sense. As such, the GBA version making these improvements isn't earth-shattering in my eyes. As is, the two games are so similar to one another that I think preferring one based on aesthetics is fair. This is no Sonic Adventure DX situation, where the re-release makes so many game-changing improvements that it's impossible for me to prefer the original, despite the original having better graphics and audio mixing. Super Mario Advance 2 is, to me, the same game just with weaker graphics and music, thus I prefer the original. That said, I would recommend newcomers play this version, because its minor improvements make it a more accessible experience overall. I could honestly go for either version when revisiting Super Mario World, but I'll probably stick to the original for the most part. And now we're at the last game in the Mario Advance sub-series, Super Mario Advance 4, Super Mario Bros. 3. I have no idea why these games are released in this strange order, but whatever. Super Mario Bros. 3 is another one of my favorite Mario games. It was the last entry on the NES, sending that system out with a bang, and it got a pretty decent port on the SNES through Super Mario All-Stars. As I said, Super Mario Advance 4 is a port of the All-Stars version to GBA, just like Advance 1. However, unlike Advance 1 and like Advance 2, Super Mario Advance 4 is a pretty good game. Jesus, take a shot every time I said the word advanced in this review. If you want to get toxic hepatitis. Anyway, just like the last game, Advance 4 now has an intro cutscene that establishes the story of the game a lot better. The NES and SNES versions of SMB3 actually had less exposition than Super Mario World, if you can believe it. When you press start, you're right in the game without anything explained. This is probably because of hardware limitations, and I do admittedly like when games aren't too bogged down in the intro, so it's excusable, but I still like the fact that there's a cutscene now. It depicts the Koopa army transforming the Mushroom World's king into various animals. A toad sends a letter to Peach asking for help, which prompts Mario and Luigi to set out and to aid the mushroom people, without realizing this is a distraction so Bowser can swoop in and capture the princess yet again. Again, it's the exact same as the original, just explained a little better, and it even maintains the plot twist from World 8. The visuals themselves are more colorful and detailed than the NES version, but still not as pretty as the SNES port. Generally, this game seems to have been ported the best, and I find that it doesn't suffer from washed out colors as much as the other Advance games, even when the game is viewed on a display other than an original GBA screen. The colors are much more accurate to the SNES, though oddly seem a bit darker. This is probably my favorite looking Mario game on the GBA because of this. The music, on the other hand, is the weakest of all the GBA Mario games in my opinion. The song's instrumentation is probably the overall worst in Advance 4, and they're a big downgrade from the SNES and especially the NES renditions. Again, music is subjective, so it's okay if you consider this your favorite rendition of the soundtrack, but I like the console version's music way more personally. But there are a couple tracks that sound really damn good on GBA, such as the underwater theme. Take a listen. As for the game itself, it's good. Yeah, it's really that simple. Super Mario Advance 4 is a solid port of Super Mario Bros. 3 on a handheld system. Not without its problems, which I'll get to in a moment, but all in all, I enjoy playing this game on GBA. I don't think I really have to go into the controls and level design, because like Advance 2, they're near identical to the original. However, and this could just be the Game Boy player's fault, again, I think the handling is slightly off. I couldn't explain why that is, but I found myself messing up jumps and such that I rarely screw up on the other versions. Jumping out of water is also very unresponsive, just like Advance 2. Because Because of this, some stages seem more annoying, namely the World 6 airship. The rest of the game has been ported immaculately, and it's a blast as always, but I couldn't help but notice that some levels just didn't really feel right. The camera is still flawed, but it seemed to be the best in these GBA ports so far. It hiccups every now and then, but these instances could also happen in the original. Out of all the GBA Mario remakes, this one seems to be the most optimized around the hardware it's on. Also, because I have nowhere else to mention this, I really like how you can see your full item inventory when you open it in the world map. It makes it much easier to keep track of what items you have. However, this version's biggest improvement is the save feature. The original NES version didn't have anything of the sort, which meant you would have to beat the game in one sitting or use the warp whistles. The SNES port added saving, but continuing didn't save your progress in any given world unless you already reached a checkpoint in the world map. Super Mario Advance 4, on the other hand, implements a save feature that works exactly like Super Mario World on SNES. After beating a fortress or airship, you're given a save prompt. It does kinda suck that you can't save whenever you want, but the game makes up for that with a quick save option that lets you continue where you left off if you need to shut the game off while you're on the go. On the other hand, the bosses are even worse than they were in the console versions. They weren't good there because of their sheer ease, but here they're more annoying than anything. Lemmy Koopa in particular was infuriating, and it made the already obnoxious World 6 airship even worse. The final boss against Bowser also has busted AI, since he seems to jump to the side into you instead of right above you like he should. Besides that, I really couldn't tell you why they're more annoying here, short of subtle control differences that might exist. Despite my bitching, I still enjoyed revisiting Super Mario Advance 4 for this review. It's a fantastic portable version of one of my favorite Mario games, but I'll be primarily sticking to the console versions from now on. This game is great for those who have never played Super Mario Bros. 3 before, because the save feature makes the game more accessible, and is an essential title for the GBA in my eyes. But if you have a way to play the other versions, you won't miss much by skipping this one. However, there is one thing I haven't discussed yet. All three of these games are not the only ones on their cartridges, and each one features an additional game. Mario Bros. Classic, a full remake of the original arcade Mario Bros. I haven't played the arcade version extensively, but even with that, I can still say this is a huge improvement. Here you can actually control your jump trajectory after pressing the button, so it's a million times more fun to play. The graphics are also a monumental step up, and actually have some color. Now this is just a score-based arcade game, so there's not really that much depth to it, but those are fun to pop in and play every now and then. I'm also all for worthwhile side content like this. It's like the Game Gear games from Sonic Adventure DX or the multiplayer from Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. It's not something that I often play, but it's still a worthy addition that increases these games' package value. And that's really all I have to say about the Super Mario Advance games. In general, they're a mixed bag. I mean, that is the title after all. Advance 1 was terrible, but the sequels were actually pretty good. Not my preferred method of revisiting these games, and I'll be sticking to the console versions from now on, but I enjoyed my time with Advance 2 and 4. They're pretty solid ports of these games, and I can see why some people prefer them over the originals. I can't get over how bad Advance 1 was, though. Again, it's not one of the worst games I've ever played, but it filled me with a rage I really haven't felt towards the game in a while now. However, the other two games in this sub-series were pretty good, and if anything, I would recommend newcomers play them if they haven't had the chance to experience these classic titles yet, because they're overall more accessible for them. And that's it. I'm finally done with the Super Mario Advance sub-series, and the Mario Marathon is back and here to stay. It sure took a while to get back to this series. Between college, other video projects, and one of the most hectic Christmas seasons, and everything in between, I've been pretty busy lately, and that won't be slowing down anytime soon, considering how a new semester literally just started up at the time of writing this. I'll still try my best to get these videos done as quickly as I can without rushing them out the door. As for what's next, there's probably going to be some changes from my original plan. I wanted to do a review of Super Mario 64 DS, but I don't have a way of recording it that would ensure my thoughts are as accurate to the original experience as possible, since DS and 3DS capture cards are absurdly expensive these days. Even with that stipulation, I doubt I would have much to say about the game anyways. I mean, I already did a full review of Super Mario 64, and that's basically just Mario 64 with a little bit of extra content and worse controls. It's okay. So that means my next Mario review will be on the landmark title in the series' history. By the mid-2000s, Mario wasn't in the best shape because of the unfortunate commercial failure of the Gamecube. These handhelds and their Mario ports helped keep both Nintendo and the series alive, but the future still seemed bleak as far as the company's home consoles were concerned. However, come 2006, no one could have seen what was coming. An announcement was made for the next system in the company's lineup, and of course, there would be original 3D Mario games on the platform. I'm of course talking about the Nintendo Wii and its signature Mario titles, the Super Mario Galaxy duo. I'll see you next time for the first of those two games, 2007 Super Mario Galaxy. Obviously. I also have some changes I've made that I'm excited to demonstrate in that video. I'll keep it a secret for now, but those with a keen eye may have noticed it already. In any event, this has been Diamond Miner Studios. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.
There's no joke here. Advance 1 bad. Advance to rank 4 good lol.